But I have to say the UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women and children, Reem Alsalem, has consistently shown common sense when it comes to defending the rights of women and girls to single-sex spaces. Just yesterday, Alsalem handed down her report that declares women are entitled to single-sex spaces in our change rooms, our toilets and single-sex sport. Specifically, that female sport categories should be exclusively accessible to biological women only, biological females, and that men who identify as trans women instead need to be moved to an open category.
Their ability to play sports in conditions of safety, dignity and fairness has been further eroded by the intrusion of males who identify as female in female-only sports categories and spaces. So I've called for the creation in sports of open categories and the reintroduction or the introduction of non-invasive, confidential and simple sex screenings where necessary.
Joining me now, someone who's been a warrior on this issue, Liberal Senator for Tasmania, Claire Chandler. Claire, I have to say congratulations to you and many women who have stood with you right around the world to put this on the agenda. But what does it say about our so-called leaders here in Australia, not just in politics, but also in sport and in the community, that we've got a UN Special Rapporteur who seem to have a better grasp of the challenges that women face than these leaders?
It's a bit of a sad reflection on these leaders here in Australia, both in sport and in politics, like you say, Peter. And frankly, the UN Special Rapporteur is spot on here. Women and girls should have the right to compete in their own single-sex sporting competitions. It's something I've been saying for years. It's something many Australians have been saying for years. And we are finally starting to see some of our institutions, including seemingly the United Nations, realise that that is the case as well. But it really does put in stark contrast the lack of leadership that we've had from big sporting codes in this country, as well as our political leaders, that they won't recognise the same thing.
OK, so what happens next? Because she wants the Special Rapporteur in her report that big sporting bodies like the Olympic Committee and all the way down to grassroots clubs, they have to accept her findings. Now, in many other areas, we all kowtow to the UN. What's going to happen here?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question, Peter, and we do know that there are many international sporting bodies like World Rugby and World Aquatics and World Athletics that have adopted common sense approaches and guaranteed women and girls the right to their own single-sex sport. But what we haven't seen is our own local sporting codes here in Australia adopt those same policies. So I think it's fair to ask why there hasn't been any leadership from our leading sporting codes, and frankly, why there hasn't been any leadership from our Australian government here that is happy to let this situation continue, where women and girls don't have that guaranteed legal right to single-sex sport.
I guess now we've got this report, the Parliament could certainly have some legislation, and it could be the coalition putting in a bill that guarantees the right of women to women's sport.
Well, certainly, Peter, back in the last Parliament, as I'm sure you'll recall, I introduced my Save Women's Sports Bill to the Parliament to rectify the issue at law to ensure that women and girls have the right to single-sex sport in this country. That bill is still publicly available, and it's absolutely up to the government if they want to pick it up and have a look at it and consider putting it into law. I don't have high hopes that the government will do that at this point in time, given some of their commentary about that bill. But like I say, it's there and anyone can pick it up and look at it and consider legislating it as they choose.
Just before we go, Claire, a barrister's come out today. The barrister deals with a whole lot of cases involving children who have gender dysphoria, and the for and against arguments from parents in relation to how they are treated with gender dysphoria. The barrister deals with this in the family court, says that Australia is relying on outdated information, that our kids are being left behind because the science around puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, surgical interventions, she says, are all rapidly evolving. We're not looking at things like the Cass report out of the UK. We're not looking at what the Scandinavian countries are doing about treating children with gender dysphoria. It's crazy to think we're leaving Australian children behind in terms of world's best practice?
Oh, it is absolutely crazy and completely concerning, like you say, Peter. And sadly, I don't think it's a surprise that the courts are operating off outdated information when the gender medicine industry here in Australia has been so reticent to open itself up for transparency and allow light to be shed on their practices. We know from the Cass review that the treatment of gender dysphoria in children in the affirmation approach that that industry has been using up until now has not been working, and it has been dismantled in the UK quite rightly. So it's time for the Australian gender medicine industry to take a good hard look at that and consider whether that review would be, or whether the outcomes of that review apply here in Australia. I'm sure they absolutely do.
I think now that the lawyers are starting to find their voices, and of course there could be lawsuits that emanate from decisions taken in these courts for young people who age and might change their minds, I think we're going to see some more action here. Senator Chandler, thank you for your time.